Veronica Paz Wells, Sowers of Life, Introduction. When man began to observe the stars and elaborate upon his calendars, he started a new era of comprehension of the universe and of his own life. However, at the same time, crucial questions arose. Some of them have been answered over the course of our history, but the great majority are still deeply immersed in speculation and theory. Among these important, puzzling questions, the possibility of extraplanetary life was conceived of only in the world of fiction. Religion, astronomy, and physics reject flatly and totally any possibility of alien life, although a few scientists have shown a little more flexibility. But even against the will of all institutions and sciences, this subject has continually arisen. With the coming of the technological revolution, and specifically the development of aviation and the invention of radar, man took notice of the presence of unknown visitors, and science began to worry about explaining the appearance of various aerial phenomena. During the Second World War, strange objects were detected on radar screens, objects visually seen by both enemy and Allied airplanes, causing panic and hysteria in innumerable villages because they were mistaken for teleguided missiles or enemy bombers. At the end of the war, several documents and reports were discovered revealing the undisclosed information of the presence of unknown aircraft whose crazy maneuvers puzzled pilots, technicians, and engineers. But up to then, each supposed their origin was totally terrestrial and that some great enemy power was making the craft. On Tuesday, June 24th, 1947, a civil pilot, Kenneth Arnold, owner of the Fire Material Supplier Company of Great West in Boise, Idaho, USA, took off from Chehalis in a single-engine airplane to Yakima, Washington, on a routine mission in search of a Navy C-46 airplane reported missing in the Cascade Range. Circling around the accident site at about 3 p.m., on the right-hand side of the airplane, he was surprised to see 9 objects, disc-shaped, flying in the direction of Mount Rainier. He estimated the objects were the size of a C-54 four-engine jet airplane. Astonished at the sight, he estimated that the machines, or flying saucers, as he called them, were flying at a speed of 2,700 kilometers per hour. Inadvertently, he launched the popular expression that would identify those objects throughout the years. Soon after, on January 7, 1948, at 13:15, a military observation party located in Madisonville, Kentucky, informed the Godman Air Force Base that a circular aircraft of more than 70 meters in diameter was flying swiftly towards Fort Knox. At 13:45, the Air Force Base military observer asked for the identification of the object over the radio, while land officers located it through binoculars. Base Commander Colonel Hicks sent an immediate message by radio ordering that the aircraft be intercepted by 3 F-51 bombers that were still flying. The small patrol commanded by Captain Thomas Mantell spotted the target at 14:45 and prepared to intercept it. 2 airplanes turned back because they ran out of fuel, and the third one, piloted by young Captain Mantell, advised via radio that the object was above him and that he would try to approach for a closer examination. At a speed of 500 kilometers per hour and at an altitude of 5,000 meters, Mantell reported that it was a huge metallic object and that it kept climbing. At 15:15, at 6,000 meters high, the captain reported to the base that the object was still climbing and that he would abandon the chase because he was not equipped with an oxygen mask. That was his last message. At 1600, the wreckage of Mantell's F-51 was found scattered over a radius of several kilometers, indicating that the airplane disintegrated at a high altitude in full flight. In spite of a thorough search lasting several days, it seems that no vestiges of the body were found. From the day of this tragic incident, the American Air Force created Project Saucer, also known as Project Sign, for the research and collection of facts related to all types of unidentified flying phenomena. In charge was James D. Forrestal, State Secretary of Defense, who later disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Years later, Project Grudge was substituted for Project Sign, and in 1951, the famous and controversial Project Blue Book was adopted under the leadership and coordination of Edward J. Ruppelt, whose administration ended in September 1953. On December 17, 1969, an Air Force Inquiry Committee in Daytona, Ohio, definitely closed Project Blue Book after the publication of the negative conclusion of the Condon Report, written by the well-known Dr. Edward U. Condon. In short, the report stated that the so-called flying saucers were nothing but an illusion caused by natural phenomena. However, things were not actually as simple as that. On April 24, 1949, after the substitution of Project Grudge for Project Sign, Edward J. Ruppelt received a confidential report on the possible consequences and risk of generalized panic any official disclosure of the reality of these objects would cause. The report made direct reference to the terrible fright that killed thousands of Americans on October 30th, 1938, when the novel The War of the Worlds by the English writer H.G. Wells was turned into a radio play and broadcast by the then journalist Orson Welles. And as a last stroke, on January 12, 1953, a committee of American experts and scientists met in the Pentagon secretly, a meeting which they called the Grand Jury, presided over by Professor Dr. H.P. Robertson, professor of theoretical physics at the California Institute of Technology. Among other learned men of that time, also present were Prof. Luis W. Alvarez, physicist at the laboratory Lawrence of Berkeley University, California, Nobel Prize winner in physics, 1968. Professors Thorsten Page, Lloyd V. Berkner, Samuel A. Goudsmith, Brigadier General Garland, Mr. H. Marshall Chadwell, and Ralph L. Clark from the CIA, and Prof. Alan Hynek as scientific counselor. During the first session, the committee was asked by the Air Force Command to reach a final conclusion. The suggested alternatives presented after innumerable official reports and documents were the following. 1. All observation reports on flying saucers can be explained as natural phenomena. 2. No conclusion can be reached from the observation reports for lack of sufficient information. 3. Flying saucers really exist and are space machines of extraterrestrial origin. After that, Major Dewey Foret, member of the committee specializing in the investigation of testimonies and stories, presented a careful, thorough study of the maneuvers of these UFO, unidentified flying objects, and finally concluded that undoubtedly they were spacecraft of unknown origin, probably extraterrestrial. Unfortunately, during the last sessions for the preparation of the final report, chiefly in the one when the future line of political conduct would be defined, members of the CIA intervened. They asked the committee to clear the cloud of mystery around the subject and asked the military services to systematically smother any public evidence. No means spared. The international political situation with communist and socialist groups, the famous Cold War, was the perfect justification. An extraordinary fact for that time is that in July 1947, the North American Army and Air Force had already found the wreckage of an extraterrestrial aircraft, probably the result of a collision, in the deserts of Roswell and Secor, New Mexico, and covered the bodies of members of the crew. At that time, Major Jesse Marcel of the Intelligence Service and General Ramey were responsible for the investigations. They informed the journalists of the Roswell Daily Record and the press in general that a meteorological balloon had been mistaken for a UFO. And to keep the press silent, they guilefully presented as evidence some debris derived from a recording balloon. At the same time, a B-29 bomber secretly took off from Roswell Base in an unknown direction and under strong military escort, carrying the extraterrestrial bodies and debris. The film Hangar 18, made in the USA in 1980, showed the dramatization of this episode in the cinema. The plot of the film exposes the manipulation by the American government to neutralize, menace, or silence anyone with any accurate knowledge of the event, even going so far as to eliminate them. It also depicts the deliberations of the high-ranking officers regarding the political aspects and the positive or negative impact on public opinion. All this in order to get rid of the wreckage of a flying saucer and the bodies of its crew. The information on the Roswell affair was later revealed when letters addressed to the American Air Force High Command were disclosed. They had been sent by the then head of FBI, Edgar Hoover, repeatedly requesting access to the extraterrestrial wreckage and bodies. It seems he was always denied. People interested in the subject, some researchers and even a few scientists believed that the presence of these objects of unknown origin was not limited to the modern age. Investigators, archaeologists, anthropologists, and several writers such as Peter Colosimo, Eric von Däniken, Serge Hutin, Louis Pauwels, Jacques Bergier, and NASA consultant Zecharia Sitchin, among others, were responsible for making the public aware of the archaeological discoveries that prove the presence of entities strange to our environment, as well as historical facts and situations that have aroused a heated controversy in the scientific world. Even with ample evidence and over 50 years after the first investigations, the civilized world still declares itself to be in doubt about the existence of UFOs, not because they are unreal, but because accepting them would imply that the world, chiefly each man and each government, would have to answer such complicated, disturbing questions as, where do they come from? What are their worlds like? What political regime do they follow? Are they going, or have they already gone through a transition similar to ours? What is their social structure like? What about their production systems? Is there misery, inflation, violence, alcoholism, or drugs in their worlds? What are their sources of energy? Do they own or use weapons? What God do they believe in? Is there a God for them? Have they succeeded in defining him? Do they have a religion? Did they have a Jesus, Buddha, or anybody like them? Do they live eternally or die like us? Do they believe in an immortal soul? Do they believe in reincarnation? What do they want from us after all? I wonder whether the modern world is actually able, prepared, or sufficiently mature to listen to and face the answers without being scandalized or shocked by what they may be. Nowadays, people are in general still searching for evidence of the existence and origin of UFOs, concrete, conclusive ones. But, as we have seen up to now, even if the evidence exists in myriad form, it would be literally impossible to make it public. The filtering and manipulation of reports, information, and news are part of the complicated mechanisms of defense used by the current system of civilization in order to maintain its control through the means of communication. Throughout time, history has shown us the incredible power of political and social alienation exerted through the manipulation of information upon public opinion. We know and will always only know what is considered important for us to know by the few. Our history books are full of examples that illustrate this statement. Any knowledge that will arouse argument, controversy, and impose a reformulation against an established situation will be irremediably out of the public's reach. Anything that endangers the system will always be concealed from people's understanding. They will only be offered what is considered best to keep order. The American projects for the investigation of extraterrestrial phenomena, which I've mentioned before, were not really created to prove the existence of flying saucers or their crews, and to communicate that information to people. Just to the contrary, they were created to find out why the saucers are here and to destroy any kind of evidence, information, or person liable to endanger the political interests of the country. The ideological windfall that these visitors might bring to Earth frightens the authorities, and in such a politically, socially, racially, ethnically, and religiously divided world like ours, a new reformative tendency, moreover a totally revolutionary one concerning the dominating power, would be extremely disastrous to a lot of interests and people involved. The dominant authorities are not willing to abdicate from their pleasant situation, advantages, and power to further the interests of humanity. As long as ignorance and obscurity persist, the great majority of people will remain submissive and obedient to their government's will and caprices. This is why this subject is so controversial. Nobody wants to admit that beyond the frontiers of this small world, other extraplanetary civilizations exist, whose truths, ethics, beliefs, and ideologies have nothing to do with the ones we know and practice. Investigators all over the world, those patient researchers who collect evidence, information, and testimony, and who should be the champions for this cause, are not free from manipulation either, be they victims or no. Although they have no more doubts about the presence of extraterrestrials, a great number of them still consider the possibility of programmed contacts just fiction. What they really want is not to have contact, but to obstinately prove that they had always been right in believing in intelligent life beyond Earth. Nothing more than that, unfortunately. They would not know what to do with the contact itself, except to present it as an attraction or curiosity. Some want to promote themselves socially and publicly through their research or a finding, creating a mysterious atmosphere and intimating that they are in possession of fantastic information, and so claiming an outstanding position in the scenario of world curiosity. There are also those who go to the extreme of trying to destroy, attack or eliminate possible evidence of contact, acting as the new inquisitors of a holy cause without going to the trouble of making a careful, thorough, and impartial investigation into the facts and people involved. Others, very few, work honestly and carefully, but being righteous and invincible within the system's daily machinations is no doubt a very difficult hurdle to continuously surmount. Although all these researchers are so near to discovering a fantastic reality, they are at the same time very far from believing that someday they can be a part of it. The great majority is content with collecting evidence, interviewing witnesses, giving talks, and becoming well known. Thus, they are still part of the repression, censorship, misbegotten ideals, and egotistical behavior of the system. To our deep sorrow and distress, their attitudes show that they are still terribly distant from what this research should really be. They even manipulate people in support of their own interests. And the few researchers we could finally mention within the traditional nomenclature as scientifically qualified have been trying to approach the secrets of the universe and some form of alien intelligence through technical means, aiming at some exchange probably linked to private interests of an institution or government, obviously wishing to gain a source of scientific and or technological benefits or riches that will place them in an advantageous situation compared to other countries. But is that specifically what the extraterrestrials are willing to offer? What about us? Have we already reached the necessary maturity to understand and use what they would have to tell us? The events that will be discussed in this book are not an isolated case of an extraterrestrial encounter, nor the most important within the world phenomenology, but they are the only ones in the history of humanity that have given concrete evidence of their objective truth. 4 times the presence of journalists, TV channels, and investigators of various origins were allowed to participate in the experiments of programmed and pre-arranged contact. The news of the first encounters that took place in 1974, experienced by myself together with a group of friends, and that later involved journalists, researchers, and people from various countries, were made known to the world for the first time by the then journalist and foreign affairs correspondent for the Gaceta del Norte of Bilbao, Spain, Mr. Juan José Benítez López. At present, the author of a great number of books about UFOs and of some of the most interesting, well-known science fiction books ever published, such as the international bestseller Operation Trojan Horse, already in its 4th printing, The Rebellion of Lucifer, and St. John's Testament, among others. Benitez took part as a guest in the Contact with Extraterrestrials, arranged by myself 5 days in advance, on the sands of Chilca, Peru, 60 kilometers, south of Lima on September 7, 1974. Later, he described his experience in a book called UFOs, SOS to Humanity, published in 1975 by the publishing company Plaza and Janes from Barcelona, Spain, one of the first books of his career as a writer, not published in Brazil yet. Soon afterwards, he returned to Peru with the journalist and photographer Fernando Mugica, collecting material and experience for another book that was published the following year, 100,000 Kilometers Chasing UFOs, by the same publishing company, not yet published in Brazil either. Today, there are several books, magazine and newspaper articles, radio and television programs that relate our present and past history of contacts. Currently, we have achieved one more programmed encounter of extraterrestrials with the press. It occurred on January 23, 1992, at 11:30 p.m. near Santiago, Chile, under the orientation and coordination of Mr. Rodrigo Frenzalida and his group, and as guests, the independent film productions Terra Nova, responsible for the program Free Zone, representing Channel 9 Megavision from Santiago. There, in the presence of all the technicians and journalists, an extraterrestrial spacecraft appeared once again. It is all registered in a television program that was broadcast in that country in July 1992, and in which, after interviewing us, the journalists described all the details of the incredible experience in which they took part with the Rama group. The following work that I present will be the narrative of the beginning of these events, the people who took part in them and still do, their problems, difficulties, and conflicts, their process, transformation, and definition through the years, the innumerable testimonies of the appearance of extraterrestrials in our experiments, of the fantastic revelations obtained from the continuous relationship with these incredible beings throughout 19 years of contact, of the journeys we made to their world of origin, and of the terrible difficulties that we faced, fighting against an implacable, powerful enemy, ourselves. The characters, situations, and events mentioned are real. They existed and still exist. The conclusions are the natural result and consequence of this endless journey into universal consciousness gained through the years. The dialogues and considerations really occurred, and the questions and answers were analyzed with the spirit and consciousness of today. This document is a humble contribution to the ones who wish to begin the discovery that we live to be happy.